Hello, in this video I'm covering the game between Magnus Carlsen and Radoslaw Wojtaszek from the World Cup in round 4. This was their second game in this match. In the first game they drew, and now Magnus had a chance to close the match with white, and they played Sicilian. And now Magnus chose the Moscow variation, bishop b5. He chose knight d7. Now Magnus goes with d4, and after takes, he doesn't capture with the queen. He takes with the knight, and after knight gf6 he goes for a castle. He doesn't even defend the pawn, because if black takes on e4, now white has rook e1, and if black's knight goes back to f6, now white has knight f5 and threatens to capture on d6 on the next move, which is very uncomfortable for black. And in this position, if he plays d5, now white could go with c4, stabilizing the knight on e4, and again black would have plenty of trouble to develop. So instead he plays a6 here. Magnus goes back to a4, e6, and now c4. And again, it's pretty risky to capture on e4 because of rook e1, and if knight goes back to f6, in case going to c5, then white can just develop, and if black takes, for example, queen takes, bishop e7, and now it's possible to go knight d5. If black takes, then knight f5 is strong and the bishop on e7 hangs, and if he castles here, then he could take and go knight f5, and on the next move he would capture the pawn on d6. And also here, after knight e4, rook e1, there's this very interesting line. I think it was played between Erik Hansen and Ivan Šarić from some Olympiad. I don't recall which one, but I think it went something like this: knight ef6, and now white sacrificed the rook with rook e6. Takes, knight e6, and after queen b6, knight c3. White had a really great compensation because black is still undeveloped. Bishops are really bad, knight on e6 is really unpleasant, and even though white is a rook down, he has a very pleasant position. So Wojtaszek avoids all this, avoids capturing on e4, and he just goes bishop e7. Now Magnus defends the pawn and also activates, which is more important. Now black castles, queen e2, and now queen c7. Now f4 by white, knight b6, and now to defend the c4 pawn, he goes back to b3. Now black tried to play more committal and to play e5, because probably if black just waits, then white would just push g4, g5 and start creating some space on the king side. He plays this, and now knight f5 by Magnus. And now black has a choice. Does he want to give up the light square bishop or the dark squared? If he gives up the dark squares on e7, then d6 is more vulnerable, and I think white would be able to use that in the future. So also if he tries bishop d8 here, then after takes, bishop e3, black would lack some coordination because rooks are not connected, and overall white is much better here, much more pleasant to play. Because of those reasons, black chose to capture on f5, and after ef, he went for rook fe8. For example, here if he tried to target the c4 pawn, now white would have to do something like g4, and now in case of knight c4 to push g5, to kick this knight away and to secure d5 later on. And after knight d7, now he has f6. And now after gf, there's a problem with this diagonal for black. It's really vulnerable, and I think after some moves like bishop c2 and queen e4, it would be really unpleasant for black. So instead he chose to go rook fe8. Now again white goes g4, black took on f4, and now bishop takes. And here black makes a small inaccuracy. He plays bishop f8 immediately, forcing the queen to go to the square which was intended even before. So after bishop f8 he went queen g2, which was very useful for him. If black tried h6 here, to stop g5. Now white has a tough time to continue this attack, because if he plays h4, now black goes back to h7, protects g5. And in case of queen f2 to defend the pawn, now bishop f6 is very nice. And now how is white going to continue? If he tries queen g3 to push g5 and attack on d6, now black has this check. And on king h1 he can take on c3. And after queen c3, rook e4. Now black is active and white's exposed kingside is going to tell. Then knight can go to f6, target the g4. It looks to me that now black is the one who is taking the control. So here h6 was better because it stops g5. Wojtaszek played bishop f8 and now queen g2. And here black took on c4, which was also questionable. Here I think that just this was better. Rerouting the knight and not allowing g5 with tempo. And if g5 happens, then queen c6, offering a trade, trying to minimize the damage. Because now white has a bishop pair, and with queens on the board it's going to be much tougher to hold this position. And now if white escapes it by queen g3, now he can take on c4, and now there's no knight d5, which is important. If white tries g6, like something similar happened in the game, now black can take, and after fg, rook e6, getting into some counterattack. And if white takes on h7, he can just play this, because if he takes on h7, then queen h3 loses on spot. So he would just make a shelter for his king in this pawn on h7, and this position would be acceptable for black. Black took here on c4, and now white goes g5, knight h5. And white went to d5 with his knight, queen c5, and now king h1. Black wants to fix his knight on c4, he plays b5, and now g6, trying to open up black's kingside. And here if black takes on g6, then you take, and on h6 this can be captured on h6. And now if you capture back, rook f5 by white, and knight e7 is a threat, capturing the queen. So if black tries to escape it by playing rook e5, defending from both threats, now knight e7 again works, because now the rook on a8 is undefended, and after bishop e7 white could take the rook, and after king g7 just this check and a very soon checkmate. And on king h4 just queen g4 checkmate. So black doesn't choose to capture, doesn't weaken his king additionally, so he goes rook a b8. Now he wants to capture to avoid this rook from hanging, so he could have rook e5 in the end. Now rook a d1 by white, and now black takes on f4, trying to eliminate the bishop pair. Black goes rook e5, and now rook h4, targeting h7. Now black takes on f5, and now white had a winning sequence. In the game he played bishop c2, which made it much easier for black to defend. But if he tried something like rook h7, the threat is very simple. If black goes rook e8, now white has rook h8, takes, and queen h3, with the checkmate on h7 on the next move. So what does black do? If he takes on g6, now queen g6. And now the threat is knight e7, bishop e7, and queen g7 checkmate. And if black tries to defend like this, then queen h5, with rook h8 next. And that's just game over. Because if you try something like queen f2, like I said before, knight e7, bishop e7, and checkmate on g7. If he tries something else, if he tries to take on d5, now rook takes, and now queen has to go to e3, some more active square. Now white would capture on f7. If king takes rook, then white has rook h5 and he wins the queen. If it goes to f7, if it takes on f7, now rook f5 is very strong. And after king e6, to go queen g4, threatening to give some discovered check, which would take the queen. So king e7, escape, but then rook g7 is decisive because after bishop g7 you can take, and after king d8, rook f8, queen e8, and you take, and you can even take the rook on b8. So this rook h7 was winning, as we saw in the previous lines. But Magnus didn't see this, and he plays bishop c2 here. And probably what he missed was this move, queen f2. A very nice defensive resource, offering the trade and trying to decrease damage from the position. Now white takes on f7, and now you cannot capture with the rook because of bishop h7 and bishop g6. And after this, rook h8. And after king takes, queen h3 with checkmate very soon on h7. So he takes here with the king on f7, because also if he goes to h8, now you can just take the queen, or play rook h7 and then take the queen. I think it's more effective to take it immediately, because it's a clean queen, you don't have to give up the rook. And after this, checkmate. So the only move left is king takes f7. Now bishop f5 was played by Magnus. Here it was better to play queen e4, targeting the rook. A rook cannot leave the f-file because the queen on f2 will hang. How do you defend this rook? If you play g6, then h7 pawn is hanging and the position is not good. So here it was best maybe to go queen f3, and in case of taking, rook f3, king g2. And this rook doesn't have any squares, because if knight e5, then bishop e4 is very annoying and the rook on f3 is without any squares. So if black goes rook c8, in case of king f3, knight e5, you would capture the bishop. It's still better for white, but you see that there is some possibility for a fortress. Rook on c2 is very active, so black would have some chances to survive this. It's not winning for white like in the previous position where it was just a checkmate or losing a queen. It is much better for white, but still there are some practical chances to survive. But after bishop f5, now black takes the rook on h4, rook f1, and now black has to step away from this uncomfortable discovered attack, and he goes to g8, rook f4, and now queen e1. If he went for to h6, now queen f2 would be nice. And now queen is a bit stranded. It defends e6, because if you move the queen to g5, now he has bishop e6 and taking the bishop in the end and giving a checkmate. So it's a bit clumsy for black. It seems very clumsy. And if black goes g6, that would be actually a big mistake, because after bishop e6, king h8, he would have queen a7. Now the rook is attacked. If it goes to d8, then queen c7 first. Now if the rook goes to e8, queen f7, and you have to give up an exchange, or you just get checkmated on g8. So here rook a8 is the only move, but after bishop c8, now this last rank is very weak. Also there are some threats like queen d8 taking the bishop. If black plays knight e5, for example, queen d8, and the bishop cannot be defended, because after king g8, bishop e6 is possible, and that's game over, because the rook on a8 will hang on the next move. So that's it. That's why g6 is bad here, but g5 works, because it doesn't allow bishop e6 check. And if white goes back, now black can even continue with g4. And the position is not as simple as in the game, but it should be equal. If white goes knight f6, king h8 can be played, because if queen f6, then you can take and take the queen. So it has to go to h8. And if knight g4 to give a check, and on king g2 to go bishop g7 to cover all these entries for the knight, and potentially to go rook g8 next. So black chose to play queen e1 here. He covered like this, and now queen e5. And now Magnus chose to just go for a forced draw by giving up the knight on d5 with queen h3. Now Wojtaszek took on d5, because if he plays g6, now it becomes very complex. After bishop e6, rook f7, it might become really... bishop e6, knight f6 also looks really dangerous. So he chose just to take the knight, and after rook f3, now the threat is either bishop h7 with bishop g6 or bishop e6. So here black chose to give perpetual with queen d1, rook f1, queen d5, and rook f3. And now they just repeat moves. Because if you try something like this, to defend from bishop e6, now bishop h7 is deadly, and after king h8, bishop g6. And there's this checkmate. If you do something else, like g6, now bishop e6 is very strong, and black is simply a queen down. So that's why black chose to give these checks, and Magnus had no other choice, because he needs to push this queen with the tempo to d5. Because if you just play a random move like king g2, now black has enough time to regroup, to play a move like g6, and I think it's winning for black. Because now g6 is possible, bishop e6, king h8. And if you try something like rook f7, now you can simply defend by bishop g7. There's nothing to do here. So yeah, that's it. See you later and have a nice day. Bye.